Government agencies are striving to improve how they deliver services digitally to the public and ideally match the user experience citizens have come to expect from commercial services. Too often, though, citizens still have to navigate across multiple websites to get to various services from their state and local governments. Here to talk about how one state has centralized its digital operations and modernized its systems and processes to improve its services delivery is Chris Gianutsos, Managing Director, Digital at EY. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let me set the stage here a little. What were some of the specific issues that EY was tasked with addressing by this state in order to develop and address its goal to improving digital services?
There were a couple of goals that this state, like many states, have in our conversations with them. And I think, this state is a little bit further along in its transformation, but we're hearing similar themes around the country. And the issues fall into two categories, some of which are just about improving the infrastructure. So, for example, they were looking for a better authoring experience that doesn't require technical expertise. They wanted to make content updates more frequently without having to involve developers. They were looking for a solution that was more scalable, cloud-based. Everyone is moving their infrastructure to the cloud, and this particular state was no exception. And then also a templated approach, and this goes along the lines of being able to make more frequent updates to content rather than hand tooling every single page. They wanted to build some basic templates so that they could update more of the experience in a more quick fashion. Those are some of the more basic kind of infrastructure related goals. But in addition to that, and where things get interesting, is what they wanted to accomplish from a customer experience standpoint. And for that specifically, what they were looking for was to achieve an experience that is more personalized, more tailored to the needs of an individual, very analogous to what we all enjoy in our experiences in the private sector, and something that was consistent across agencies. So as you traverse the different portions of the state, you knew and you felt trusted that it was all under a larger umbrella of this particular state agencies.
So I understand EY teamed with Adobe to help modernize this agency's digital platform. Based on what you learned, why did the state choose Adobe versus, say, an open source platform? And what went into that decision?
So when the state was looking to accomplish some of the goals that I just talked about, one of the things that made them different is the technology leadership of this particular state all came in with a lot of commercial experience. So they knew what good looks like. They knew what personalization meant. They knew the importance of personalization in marketing in terms of improving the overall customer experience and making it easier for people and individuals to do business with the government. In addition to that, they were looking for a platform where they could reap the benefits of continuous improvement, where they weren't doing all of the R&D themselves. Sometimes those solutions are a little bit more expensive up front, but they tend to have a lower total cost of ownership over the lifetime because they don't have to build every component from scratch. They can rely upon the millions and billions of dollars that a company like Adobe spends on product development. And they were also looking for consistency across agencies that wasn't just superficial. So not just having the same brand and logo and color scheme on every agency website, but something that truly was consistent and followed you as you went from agency A to B to C.
Appreciate your laying that out for us. And then next, what would you say are the pros and cons of building out a centralized digital platforms across multiple agencies versus modernizing one agency's platform and then replicating that to work elsewhere across a state organization?
The pros really fall into that consistency point that I just made on the last question. By having a centralized digital platform, you get that consistency of customer experience and you get to share the data across agencies. And that's not just the personal data, but that's also the data on their visitation, their behavior on the site. And that helps make each individual agency site a little bit more personalized and a little bit stickier. They also get to leverage the innovations and development that one agency makes from another. So if a particular agency tries an experiment and finds that it's working, the rest of the state can take advantage of those same investments. And then very importantly, and this is something we see in the commercial sector a lot, by having that centralized model, They get better analytics of the customer journeys and an understanding of what works across each of the state agencies. Personalization analytics like that, they work best at scale. There are certain things you can do as an agency, but you really get the benefits and the ROI when you think about that in terms of someone's holistic experience with state government. So there are a lot of pros and reasons to do it. The cons fall into the age-old change management. When you have that centralized model, it takes a little bit longer to get buy-in from each agency. Everyone has to be on board. There's more time spent getting those data sharing agreements in place. So there's some initial speed that can be sacrificed. But long term, we think that the benefits of that centralized model for something like digital experience really outweigh the cons of each agency doing their own thing.
Appreciate that. And then can you describe what was actually ultimately implemented?
Yeah, for this state, they started with Adobe's web CMS platform or Adobe Experience Manager. And that is really the core of where those content updates that I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation happen. That's effectively the glass that people interact with as they come to each of these state agency experiences. And then behind that was Adobe's Experience platform. So some of the data and personalization tools that make that experience better. So things like Adobe's Customer Data Platform or CDP and their real-time journey optimizer were some of the products that help drive the personalization.
And then, Chris, can you talk a little bit about some of the tangible service level improvements that EY's alliance with Adobe has been able to deliver or eventually expects to deliver?
Those benefits fall into some of the similar categories that I mentioned from the very first question. So if we think about some of the basic technical improvements, the speed to update content, a reduction in the overall footprint and number of pages of the website, which leads to reduced maintenance. Those are some early benefits that any government agency that implements a solution like this would start to enjoy. Now, we're also working on a pilot around personalization, and the use case for that particular pilot was reducing confusion, in this case for driver eligibility, and therefore calls into the call center. So eligibility, there's a lot of different checks that go in, and a lot of particular criteria. Each state probably has different ones. And as a result, the centralized agency that administers this gets a lot of calls with people confused about their eligibility, offenses they may have, or suspensions that they may have. So the goal of the pilot was to reduce those calls coming in by providing rather, better visibility into the eligibility of their status so that they could do it online in a self-service basis rather than calling in. We're still in early days, but the initial results are promising.
Well, speaking of personalization, I know one of the issues that states often wrestle with is, balancing data privacy issues in order to get to that personalization. What would you say to states that are still concerned about maintaining data privacy as they move forward with personalization?
It's a huge concern both in the public and the private sector, how that data is being used, what's being collected, how it's being used, and who else is getting access to it. And I think the bar is significantly higher for government agencies than it is for the private sector.
Mhm.
All of that being said, I think it comes down to a couple of key criteria. And from a user standpoint, what they're worried about is trust, transparency, and value. So trust is, do I trust you as an organization? Do I have a need to engage and interact with you? Transparency is, explain to me how you're using it. Who else might have access to this data? Are you going to sell it? Many private companies sell those data, the data that they collect. Government agencies cannot, so they have a leg up there. And then really, and probably the most important thing is, what value am I getting from contributing data? Survey after survey demonstrates that people say that data privacy is really important to them, but their behavior actually demonstrates that maybe it's not as important as they say it is. If you think about our use of social media, at this point, it's well known that that data is used in a variety of different ways, many of which an individual user may not be supportive of. And yet, we still use those platforms. We still contribute that data. So I think people's actual behavior does not necessarily reinforce what they say about being concerned about data privacy. And at the end of the day, it comes back to if they believe that an experience, or if they see results that an experience is more personal, they don't have to log in multiple times, they don't have to answer the same question within every single agency, those concerns start to go away.
So finally, Chris, what lessons would you say other public sector leaders might take away from your efforts in helping to modernize the state's digital platforms? And why are technology alliances so important?
I'll handle the alliances question first. Alliances are really important because the public sector in many cases is behind consumer expectations with respect to their digital experience. And therefore, looking to new partners who have that commercial experience, who can cast a broad net and see what trends are having an impact on the way people interact digitally is really important. And alliances brings together the best of multiple partners, all of whom may have a slightly different experience or slightly different point of view on what is working and what isn't. And when an agency or a state government uses a combination of providers for something like this, they really are getting the best of breed, not just from a technology solution, but from a thinking standpoint. The other value is that inherently built in are some checks and balances through alliances, right? The various parties in play, when you have a software company like Adobe and a services provider like EY, both of whom are leaders in their field, we can keep each other honest on the way a project is unfolding, on the techniques we should be adopting, and on the methodology we should be following. And ultimately, the end result for a state or for an agency is that much stronger.
Well, Chris Gianutsos, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to share some of your insights and perspectives about some of the things you've learned in working with state organizations about modernizing and improving their service delivery for the public in general. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.